Right, so welcome everybody. For those that already know me, it will come as no surprise that the Reconsidering Dementia series is very close to my heart. It's been very much a cornerstone of my life at Open University Press, starting the same year my tenure began at this imprint, half a decade ago. That year, I had a delightful set of conversations with Dawn Brooker and Keith Oliver around the seed of an idea, and that idea was a series of books rooted in and inspired by the late Tom Kitwood's seminal text, Dementia Reconsidered, aimed not only at the student, the academic, the researcher, and the practitioner, but also built for those working with, impacted by, caring for, and living with dementia. That seed grew into a beautiful, multifaceted flower, tackling the concepts that are truly interdisciplinary and the contemporary issues that challenge and engage readers to think deeply about the topics. Many of these concepts and topics were unheard of back when Kitwood's Dementia Reconsidered published in 1997. Today, we are at the cutting edge of dementia care with resources in this series drawing on theory, research, and experience to critically reflect on their individual topics in great depth. From ethics and psychotherapy to education and training, leisure and everyday life, to the spaces, places, and people that make up the neighborhoods of those living with dementia, and now to our newest contribution and collection, Talking with Dementia Reconsidered. This resource places people living with a diagnosis of dementia at its core, providing each person with the opportunity to express themselves whilst viewing their lives in relation to the Kitwood flower model. Authored by a person living with dementia, an experienced consultant clinical psychologist, and a respected academic, the three combine to amplify and showcase the words of the 15 people living with dementia interviewed for the book in an original, authentic, and unique way. So it is my pleasure today to introduce the authors behind the book, Keith Oliver and Reinhard Gus, alongside members of the 15 individuals living with dementia interviewed within the text. I look forward to hearing about the journey of collaboration and innovation in dementia care captured in this resource. And so now over to Keith and Reinhard, who will introduce the members of the 15 who were able to be here today. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sam, and thank you everyone for attending the webinar today. And a particular thank you to those people who are representing what's been termed the 15. So many publishers produce books on dementia. Some are by people with dementia, often with elements of ghostwriting. None do what OUP are doing, though, with this book series, that Talking with Dementia Reconsidered belongs to and belongs within, which places people living with dementia at the book's centre as writers, contributors, editors, cover artists, and we've got a number of those with us today, and material selectors or for future books. Today, and with the preparation which has gone into making today happen, shows how Sam, Hannah, and their team have enthusiastically learnt how to effectively work with people with dementia to produce books that we can all be proud of. Now to focus a little on the book which is central to today's webinar, Talking with Dementia Reconsidered. And this is it here. I'm delighted to have on the panel alongside me today my co-author, Reinhard Gus, and 8 friends who, like me, do their best to live as well as possible with dementia. These 8 are central to the book as part of the group of 15 people, and we did try hard to think of a more suitable label for us, who Reinhard and I spoke with back in 2021 when the pandemic was still very much part of all our lives. I'm also very grateful to Millie for joining us today to speak about her role as a university student who during placement supported the book project. Now, those who do read the book will get to know much more about the 15 contributors because of their biographies are contained in the book. But I'd like now to introduce each one in turn, just to say a couple of sentences about themselves so that people in the webinar get a sense of who's speaking. I'm going to start with you, Julie.
Morning. My name's Julie Hayden and I live in Halifax in West Yorkshire, and I am living with an as yet unspecified young onset dementia.
Thank you, Julie. Tracy, your turn next.
Hi everyone. Yes, my name's Tracy Shorthouse. I'm a retired nurse and I live in Folkestone in Kent, and I was diagnosed with posterior cortical atrophy in 2015 when I was 45.
Thank you, Tracy. Jennifer.
I live in Cheltenham. I was diagnosed 15 years ago. I passionately believe we can do good stuff. I live in Cheltenham. I used to be a GP involved in medical education.
Thank you, Jennifer. George, your turn.
Okay, I'm having trouble muting and unmuting. Yeah, hi. I live in Shropshire. I was diagnosed with mixed dementia 10 years ago, and that's me.
Thanks, George. Chris Norris.
Yeah, afternoon, everybody. I'm Chris Norris. I live in Ashford in Kent. I was diagnosed with frontotemporal dementia at Christmas 2012. So that was a nice Christmas present.
Francis, your turn.
Hi, I'm Francis. I live in the beautiful, snowy, sunny Brecon Beacons, where it's freezing today. I got diagnosed a long time ago, more than 10 years, and I have posterior cortical atrophy.
Thank you, Francis. Next, it's Nigel's turn, staying in Wales.
Good afternoon, I'm Nigel. I live in Swansea. I'm currently chair of Three Nations. I was diagnosed in 2015 with posterior cortical atrophy. I've never seen so many people with PCA in one room at once. It's amazing. Such a rare dementia. And I'm so pleased to be here this afternoon. Thank you. Thank you for the invitation, Keith.
It's great to have you and great to have everyone else with us, Nigel. Thank you. Staying on a Welsh theme, but not necessarily in Wales at this moment. Chris Maddox.
Yeah, hi everybody. Thanks, Keith. I've been trying to change my name from Christine to Chris because I only get called Christine when I've done something wrong. Yeah, I'm Welsh and I now live in Eastbourne. I moved here in 2017. That was a year after I received the diagnosis of early onset vascular dementia when I was 60. 2 years later, I was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. And then in 2022, I was diagnosed with Lewy body dementia.
Thank you, Chris. Millie, would you like to say a few words about yourself?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Millie Godfrey and I was a psychology placement student with KNPT where I met Keith and Reinhard. And I now work as an assistant psychologist in Essex for an older people service.
Great to have you, Millie. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Reinhard.
Yeah, hello, I'm Reinhard Goose. I'm a clinical psychologist and a neuropsychologist. I am a lead psychologist for older people's mental health in Bromley in Kent at Oxley's Trust these days. And I've been working with people with dementia in a psychological sort of way for 35 years or so in this country.
Thank you. Thank you. So now we're going to move to the most important part of the webinar, which is to enable those people who have dementia, who contributed to the book, to be able to tell us something about their story of their involvement in the book. And please do remember what Sam said. Do place your questions and comments either in the chat box or in the Q&A, because we'll be delighted to take them in the final 15 minutes of this webinar. That'd be really helpful. And I'm going to kick off then with an open question to all the panelists today, which really is along the lines of what encouraged you to agree to talk to Reinhard and I when we invited you to be part of our conversations, which led to the book. Chris, your hand went up immediately.
Yeah, I was quick there. I just think that there is so much ignorance around dementia. And I know I've got friends who are in denial that they have dementia, and I just want to raise awareness. And what made it special for me was knowing you so well, Keith, and Reinhard. And I knew that I was in safe hands by you telling our stories. So yes, to raise awareness and to make people more aware of what it's like for us living with dementia.
Thank you, Chris. That's a great start to the webinar. Jennifer.
Well, I agree what Chris said, and knowing Keith, of course, we've known each other for many years, certainly helped. But the thing is, there's so much stigma about dementia, and I do believe that that has changed over the last 10 years. So anything that will help people, I mean, that's my bottom line, anything that helps people.
Thank you. And yes, I endorse that. We do hope that people who read the book can take many strong messages and positive messages from it. George.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what everybody else has said, but also I just quite enjoy, in a sort of slightly introspective way, and so slightly psychological way, looking back at my life and my thoughts and how I come to dementia. So it was just a really interesting. I remember the conversation very well. It was really an interesting sort of deep dive into all sorts of things about me.
Yeah, thank you. And while George was speaking there, just before I move to Julie, a few thoughts prompted in my mind, which were that most of the conversations took place on Zoom. Of the 15, 12 took place on Zoom and 3 were face-to-face. And those 3 were people who lived more locally to Reinhard and I, because we're both based in Canterbury. And then alongside that, George also did prepare beforehand, which was really gave us a different slant to the conversation and very, very insightful as well. Indeed, George gave me, when I was editing the book, the biggest laugh I've had in reading the book when he was stating about when he was a child. And to work out what George told us, you've got to read the book. But it was a really good, funny story that George told us.
Laugh with or laugh at?
Laugh with. Yeah. Julie.
Yeah, it was, as well as the points raised before, it also appealed to me that it was a chance for us to provide backup and living proof of the fact that of the value of Kit Wood's work. So it's nice when a text comes out which seems to make sense, but then all these years later, to have people with dementia coming forward and saying, well, this is how much it's benefited us, putting Kit Wood's theories into practice and the impact it's had in our lives.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that in, Julie. We'll come back to Kit Wood with the subsequent question, but thank you for raising that. Chris Norris.
Yeah, it was great to do the book, but what I think best came out of the book is from the 15 of us, yes, we're all living with dementia, but you get that great spectrum of how dementia isn't the same for everybody. And as Nigel highlighted, that's the first time I've seen 3 people with that same type of rare dementia all coming up. But so it raises that awareness, and we've all got different views on the world and how we see it. Although, as in ordinary society, every person is different as well. So that's what was great about the book.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. And you know, I thought you were going to go on to say, you know, you meet one person with dementia, you meet one person with dementia, because that fits in with what you're saying there. You know, each individual is unique and different, but so often we're lumped together as being, you know, a homogeneous same person really, or same set of symptoms. And of course, we're not that at all. Nigel. You're on mute, Nigel.
Telling me. I was drawn to it because of a trust element. I'm asked quite a bit to do stuff like this, and I don't always take up the offer because I don't trust the people who are asking me. And you know, it's quite easy to fall into the trap of self-loathing about the way people view you after diagnosis. And what was attractive to me was, as Chris Norris said, about this broad spectrum, this breadth of experiences, which shows that one size doesn't fit all, which I guess is what we've been saying for donkey's years, really. You know, people don't listen to us. And of course, you have to trust the other participants as well. And I know most of you quite well, and I didn't feel that it was going to be one of those books where let's see who could be the smartest, let's see who could be the biggest, let's see who could be the most influential. And I quite enjoyed the experience, because there's no greater joy for me than talking about myself. It's got to be said.
Well, we enjoyed hearing you talk about yourself, Nigel, and certainly enjoyed reading it when we read what you'd said. Just before moving to Chris again, one thing that really came through, I think, in the conversations with people, and I'll bring Reinhard in a moment as well, was that people were truthful and people were honest and people were open and people were able to trust, I think, both Reinhard and I, with their innermost feelings. Some people were saying they hadn't spoken about what they were talking to us about ever before, and they were going to put that into a book. Now, I've had conversations with professional authors who have invited me to be part of books, and I've never had that same sense of feeling with them. Even though some of them I got on really well with and was able to speak quite honestly with, quite openly with, it was never quite the same. So this is really quite a unique experience, and I hope that readers who do engage with the book get a sense of that. Back to you, Chris.
Yes, the only other thing that I just thought was quite important to mention, Keith, is that you mentioned dementia to people and they automatically jump to end stage, and they forget there's a beginning, there's a middle, and there's an end. And that we're not sat in the corner and not able to communicate. We still have lives to live, and we still have important messages to pass on. So please remember that there's a beginning, a middle, and an end. And I hope we all stay at the beginning for a lot longer.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. That's a very, very powerful message to share. And it reminded me that last night I was watching Between the Covers, the book programme on BBC Two, and Mira Sayal was talking about Wendy Mitchell's first book. And she indeed raised that point that Wendy and many of us as well had said in the past about this beginning, middle, and end. Mira Sayal was emphasising that on BBC Two last night, as I said, in talking about Wendy's first book. Indeed, Wendy wasn't part of the 15, but Wendy wrote the introduction to the book, and it was one of the last things she did before she passed away. So it was a great honour and a great thing to have as a part of her legacy. Reinhard.
Yes, what did you have a question for me, or do you just want me to talk away?
Can you say something about something they've heard from the people so far?
Yeah, I mean, what Chris just said kind of led me on to what was part of my motivation about why I wanted to write this book or a book, and that's been always that I've had the great fortune to work with many of the 15 and meet many people with dementia who did exactly what Chris described, is be out there in the world, have messages to give that are important for other people to hear. And the way that dementia activists, like the people that we talked with, have influenced practice and how dementia is generally regarded, and have produced materials that I use to great benefit within my therapeutic work with people with dementia. And that I was just always interested in spending time talking more with some of these people who are active, open, out there, talking about living with dementia and producing the sorts of materials that might make it easier for other people to realize that there is a beginning and a middle in which an awful lot of life needs to be lived.
Thank you, Reinhard. I'm now going to move on to the next question I want to explore with those of you who were part of the 15. We talked just now, I guess, about what and why. What were your feelings about being involved in the book, and why did you get involved in the book? I now want to turn you from being a contributor to being a reader. So when you received your copy of the book, I guess, like most of us, you probably immediately scanned through to find out the bits that were what you had said and be reminded about what you'd said, perhaps. But I guess beyond that, then you'd read what other people also said to us. I want now to ask each of you who want to respond to this, how did you feel about reading the words of others when you read the book? Chris.
Yeah, I thought that I knew the 15 people very well. But it was just so very different to read their different approaches and the way that they look at life. And you get that much more in-depth feeling around the person. And I mean, if it was new for us to learn about each other, certainly I think it's going to be really interesting for the general public to learn about the variety and what makes us tick, because we're not just dementia, we're whatever careers we had beforehand, and far more than that. And it's very easy for people to look at us and go, oh, they just look at us as the dementia person with the dementia, rather than what they were with their previous life. We've all had previous lives. We weren't born with dementia, and that's what was great about reading about each other.
That's great, Chris. Thank you for that. George.
I'd just echo that, and to say that I think one of the great values of this book is for people to either recognize as clinicians that we are not just a disease, we're people, and you need to find out about our lives before you start treating us. Because otherwise you will not give us personalized treatment. And for those who are not clinicians, those who perhaps just have an interest in dementia, or perhaps they have a relative with dementia, as Chris said, it encourages people when they read about us, I hope, to reflect on their own lives, to remember that they have done lots of things and they have value. They're not just a diagnosis of dementia, the end. They are still living and they have huge experience to give.
Thank you, George. That's really important to express. Thank you. Tracy and then Jennifer.
Thanks, Keith. Yes, I think that I always say that dementia doesn't define us. We're not just we are the people first. When we give talks to people who have been recently diagnosed with dementia, the first thing we say is, you are still the same people. We are the same people always. And I like the book in the way that, as a nurse or retired nurse, my ethos was always person-centered care or caring in a holistic way. And the book is that. So the book focuses on all of us, all of our lives, and that. And I like that. I like learning about different people's lives. Even when I was a nurse, I used to like learning about people's lives over what was wrong with them, and I'm hoping the oh yeah, I can't remember what I was going to say now. Sorry, it's gone.
Don't worry, Tracy. What you've said is immensely important, and thank you for sharing it. And knowing you as well as I do, I'm not at all surprised by what you've said. So thank you for sharing that. Jennifer.
Well, what I loved about it was that in the book, so many of us were called either rebels or that we had a sense of humour, or that we all had challenges. So there were three things that were identified almost all of us, which I thought was rather good. But the sad thing about it, there were two things mentioned in the book, a couple of times that weren't addressed, which I felt was a bit sad because I felt they were important things, and I can mention those if you want me to.
Please do.
Well, the first one's about music, about Chris Norris, when the doctor told Chris to stop playing music. When we know music is so beneficial, and that didn't appear to be addressed anywhere. It didn't appear to be mentioned in the book that music was so important. So that was really rather sad to me. And the other one was, again, with Chris, so he said a lot of very good stuff, was that about the anger at his dog, you know, instead of his wife. But I felt that my husband was always very angry at me, but it wasn't me that he was angry with, it was the dementia. But I think the anger situation is a subject that is often not talked about in dementia.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think you've got the two Chris's there slightly mixed up in the sense that Chris Norris was the musician and Chris Roberts was the dog owner.
Yes, okay, well, sorry.
Yeah, no, it's understandable. I just wanted to make that point because I could see Chris looking a bit puzzled.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say that because when Reinhard and I spoke to Chris Roberts, who's not on this Zoom today, sadly, he wasn't in a good place. And when you read what Chris said to Reinhard and I, it was really, it wasn't distressing as such because we know how hard living with dementia is for all of us. But it was indicative of one of those patches that we all go through at times where life was really, really hard for him. And it probably was on the back of the pandemic, the lockdowns and all this sort of thing that was happening at that time. So the book is very much a period piece in one sense. And I think that actually adds to its power and its significance because it shows 15 people who are resilient, who had come through something that had challenged everybody in society. And the people who had been most affected, some would argue, were those with dementia, either in care homes or living in their own community, but isolated because of the lockdowns and what was coming with the pandemic. So that was the backcloth to these conversations. Julie.
Nigel was first.
Sorry. Lost you, Nigel. Oh, yeah, got it.
That's okay, Julie. How you? The one thing that I quite enjoyed. I mean, although you know me, know I battled stigma all my life in various forms or another, but I've never been so overtly stigmatized as when I got dementia. And I think it's because it's a deficit agenda, isn't it? You know, people concentrate on what's gone, not what's still there. And I think that if you know if that's not handled properly, then people feel they're slaves to other people's wishes and whims, and to a certain extent, I guess they are. But the one thing that surprised me after diagnosis and getting to know people was the depth of character of people living with the diagnosis. It absolutely blew me away. I'm in awe of it. I'm in awe of it now, you know, where you see people speaking in public for the first time, putting away all their fears and anxieties and going out there and giving the message. When you see people supporting other people the way that they do within the dementia community, you know, it's amazing. And this book reflects that. I mean, it's one of the very few books that I've read over the years, which reflects that people living with, you know, we didn't ask for it. You know, it came in our lives anyway with all this ghastly bits and pieces that comes with it. But we didn't lay down and listen to the people who told us our lives are over. And I don't think we're unusual in that. I think that there are lots of people doing that, probably unconsciously don't realize. But I think if they read this book, they'll say, yeah, I'm one of those people. I do that.
Thank you, Nigel. Julie?
Yeah, going back to what you were saying, Keith, about when you're speaking with or perhaps reading about something that someone's written who has dementia, it's always going to be that snapshot in time because it's where that person is now, how they're feeling now, according to not just their condition, but about how they're affected by what's happening in their lives. So I know at the time of the interviews, and I was affected, I know like a lot of people, especially affected by the enforced isolation because I live alone. And so my world came down to lots of on-screen time to the max and to overload, but actually seeing a person that was very rare and caused me to kind of have a lot of issues with that respect. So I think during the interviews, I think I said to you at one point, when I was talking to you and Reinhard, I felt like I was in a bit of a fog, and afterwards reflected back to you. Actually, I'm not altogether what I said. And if what I said was making any sense, and you said, "Oh no, it was all right." And it wasn't until I got the book and could remind myself of what I'd said, I thought, "Thank goodness." You know, I did manage to make a bit of sense.
Yeah, no, certainly did, Julian, and thank you for sharing that this afternoon as well. Just before moving on to the next question, a couple of things came to mind that might be useful for viewers to know. The geography of the 15, we did draw people from Scotland, from Wales, and from England. And it was a fairly even balance of men and women. And the BAME community was represented. We had one guy whose family origins are in Pakistan, and one lady whose family origins are in Jamaica. We had people from the LGBTQ community involved in the 15. So it was very diverse as it possibly could be, with 15 participants. And the last thing to say on this before we do move on to the next question is that one of the professional academics who read the book in its draft manuscript stage was Professor Tom Denning. And those of you who know Tom Denning, or don't know him for that matter, he is a very, very eminent, worldwide known old age psychiatrist, probably one of the best known, certainly in the UK, probably in Europe, and one of them in the world, who described this book, no exaggeration, he described this book as a landmark book. He really recognized how important this book is in the library of books on dementia. And as it was said earlier, part of the inspiration for the book was the work of Tom Kitwood. And those who don't know the model that we used, if I can hold up my small visual aid here of the Kitwood flower, which I take around with me everywhere I go, but to conferences where slides aren't available. It has on the flower, love at the center, and then in the petals, inclusion, comfort, identity, occupation, and attachment. And they form the 6 chapters in the center part of the book. And that was the structure that we used to help Reinhard and I scaffold our conversations with the 15. Do you want to say something about that, Reinhard, before we open it up to
yes, I do. But I also wanted to make sure that we are going to Frances, who I think had her card up a couple of times. Frances, do you want to go first? And then I'll say something about structure for a minute. But you're still muted, Frances.
I thought I was doing quite well there, Frances, but I'm sorry I've missed you.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, I've been listening to this with great interest. As I said, I've got posterior cortical atrophy, and my life has changed quite dramatically since my sight started to go. And it means that in order to understand the book, my husband has had to read it to me, and he's not very good at reading. However, I did enjoy it, and I just really want to say how brilliant you two are to get this out there, and then to hear that it's being so well received is really, really good. What also strikes me is that it's some while back since we had our interviews, and I had to reread the thing in order to recall what I'd said, and so much has changed for me since then that I hardly recognize myself in it. However, what I do remember, of course, is what a wonderful time we all had in that time. We're probably the only people who didn't suffer too badly with the fact of lockdown, because we did so much stuff all together, that it passed really quite quickly. And I just felt that this book and the way it's sort of, it's all sort of round the whole Kitwood flower thing, which I've always thought of as something massively important. It's just an important way of bringing to people the fact that we are all people. We are who we always were. We just might have one or two knobs missing now. That's all. That's really it.
Thank you, Francis.
I can't apologise enough for missing you there, Francis, but what your contribution as always was really important. And what I would want to say on this webinar is that each of the books in the series, and there are 6 at the moment with 2 more coming out shortly, one of which was co-edited by George on young onset dementia. Each of those 8 books has a cover designed by the artwork done by a person with dementia. And that's the only time anywhere that in the world that's been done. And one key reason for that is Frances, because not only has Frances done one of the book covers, but she taught George, Gail, and myself, who are some of the contributors of the artwork, how to do art, how to paint, how to draw. So this absolutely unique and fabulous idea of people with dementia contributing artwork for the front cover of a book, and then for that to be used throughout a series, is largely thanks to Frances. George.
Yeah, I mean, apart from echoing, of course, again, everything that Francis said, I'm just thinking about what the most important thing in the book is for people reading it, and for that matter, who should read it. And I think the part at the end of each section of the flower, where you say, what learning can we take from the 15? I think each of those sections are the keys for future people working in the field, whether it's in social care or in clinical work, or for that matter, for anybody else, and government in particular. That's drawing out those lessons is really, really important.
Thank you. Reinhard.
Yes, I mean, it's just so wonderful to hear all your different takes on the book and what you made of it. And it's all apart from it being wonderful to have you all on the same screen and together at this time. It's just brilliant. So some of the things seem to have worked that we've tried to do, isn't it? It's because we came to this book from different directions, Keith and I, and Keith with his love of Kitwood's flower, and me with my admiration for the dementia activists. And we tried to bring the two things together, and the way that we brought it together was through the Kitwood flower, which also then makes it fit within the series. And perhaps, Jennifer, that would be my answer to your question about music, isn't it? Is that Chris Norris gave us a lovely insight into the benefits of music. But as it happened, the other people involved in the interviews, when it came to occupation and what they do to help them, then there was a great deal of visual arts. There was poetry and writing, but not an awful lot of music. And that depended on how people spoke to us. And I suppose one of the things that was I suppose Keith would agree that part of my contribution was about structure and method and how we do this in a kind of, what we discussed about was more a journalistic approach than a scientific PhD type approach, but we used scientific methodology, we used semi-structured interviews to keep us on track, and we used thematic analysis of the interviews that people gave us in order to bring this all together and then think about what people told us under the headings of the Kitwood flower petals. And I suppose the final thing I just wanted to say is we had such long discussions not really arguments, but discussions about how we are editing this in order to make sure that we are taking out things that are repetitive or that that maybe don't sound right, and how do we edit people's words without changing them altogether and without. And it's just great to hear that on the whole people feel that the individuality and people's different characters and approaches are kind of preserved in there. That's been lovely to hear.
Thank you, Reinhard. And that's a lovely segue to bring Millie in now, when you mentioned the word thematic analysis. But just before doing so, Millie, just noted John Keady's comment there on the screen. Don't know whether you were able to read that, Francis, but John Keady, who edited the book you did the cover for, has acknowledged it in the chat box. So thank you, John. Over to you, Millie. The stage is yours.
Yeah, so I suppose I'm sort of here to represent sort of the placement students who I've sort of worked alongside. But I think for me, I met Keith and Reinhard in my third year of my undergraduate degree, and up until then I hadn't really met many people with dementia, and until I started my placement I didn't have a very good understanding of what dementia is and what it can, a diagnosis can mean for people. So I think as students we sort of joined the project sort of halfway through, and we helped Keith and Reinhard code all of the different transcripts into elements of the kitwood flower, and I think that was really insightful, because we were able to really and I think people have previously shared how sort of honest and they were, and we were sort of able to get a really good understanding of how everyone was before their diagnosis, sort of, and after their diagnosis, and how, although there's everyone's sort of coming from lots of different backgrounds, there is quite a lot of shared experiences in line with sort of kitwood's sort of different petals.
It's wonderful to have you here today, Millie. Thank you for taking time out of work to join us and to represent that group of really, really important people. And those of you who read the book will notice that two of Millie's best friends, Laura and Ellie, who were staying in Kent when Millie absconded to go and work across the border in Essex, were more local to me and Reinhard and able to help us in the final stages of the book. And they've actually written sections of the book, and that's acknowledged in the book as well. So they were a great team, those three. Jennifer.
Well, that's good what she said. I'm glad that she learned so much about dementia, but there's one lack in the book, which I noticed reading it through, about hallucinations. Now, so many of us have got, well, several of us had Lewy body, and as we know, Lewy body have hallucinations, but they weren't mentioned, and the terrible trouble that they can be. I'm just making a point, that's all.
Thank you, Jennifer. Yeah, but as Reinhard said earlier, if you'd told us about those, we would have included them in the book. But thank you for raising.
I did.
Oh, did you? Oh, okay.
I was the only one that did.
Okay. Well, I apologise then, as one of the co-authors. So finally, now then, I just want to, before we open it up to questions from the floor, and we're pretty much bang on time, Sam, are there any final comments? I mean, Jennifer's just kindly offered us that final comment from her there. But any other final comments from people who are on the panel today that you'd like to add before we open it up, open the doors to the audience? Chris Maddox.
I just want to say the importance of having lived experience in what everybody does, in everything, because without the lived experience, we can't make progress, and nothing about us without us.
Absolutely. And one last thing I'd forgotten as well, I think it may have been Reinhard who mentioned about poetry. The book does also include a number of poems written by people with dementia, some of them written by some of the 15, but also we've brought in two other people. We brought in Ronald and Martina, who aren't part of the 15, but do also have dementia. And they wrote two lovely poems for us, which again are included in the book. So I just want to acknowledge their contribution as well. Now I'm going to hand back to you, Sam, to help us with the questions from the audience.
Thank you, Keith, and thank you everyone for your contributions over the last 45 minutes. It's been so nice to see you all in person, but also to hear your insights and experiences working with Keith on this wonderful resource. So from the Q&A, quite a nice one to start with. I have for Keith and Reinhard, what inspired you to semi-structure the conversations around the Kitwood flower model?
Sorry, Sam, I missed that.
So
What
how
inspired
did
you
we-
to semi-structure the conversations around the Kitwood flower model?
I'll take that first of all, Reinhard, but then you please chip in. The Kitwood flower model was introduced to me now about 10 years ago when I personally worked for Dementia UK. And I thought, I wish I'd known that right from being a student and a teenager, because for me, it encapsulated what life is like for someone like me. All of those 6 words to me sum up what my life I'd like to be like. It isn't always like that, but when it's good, what those petals suggest: comfort, love, attachment, identity, inclusion, occupation. That's my good days. And that's the days when I'm able to function effectively. And I carry it everywhere with me in my diary. It goes everywhere I go, that model, so that I can refer to it and remind myself of it. And as I've said at conferences, if I had a tattoo, I probably would have that one on my arm, but I haven't, and I'm not going to. But there you go. Much as I've been tempted by other people. Over to you, Reinhard.
Yeah, but I mean, I suppose from my perspective, all apart from, in order to make this book fit within the series, it needed to fit within Kitwood, but that happily coincides with Keith's take on the flower and with my long-standing admiration for Kitwood and using him in my clinical practice. And I suppose the Kitwood flower is one way of how I've often have conversations with people with dementia about how can you arrange life, how can you think about your life in order to make the best of it that you possibly can in these early, middle, or possibly even later stages. And going through the different aspects of the flower and thinking about life in those kinds of terms, that's always been a great psychological framework. And I suppose semi-structured interviews, we devised those and we wrote them down, and we had our questions, and we kind of tried to tick things off as we went along through our conversation.
Oh, I think Reinhard is frozen.
Totally frozen, Reinhard.
Yeah. While we're thawing him out, just to say that, I mean, the Kitwood flower model was actually published in 1997. And another motivation for me was to see, is it still relevant for other people living with dementia, not just Keith Oliver, but other people living with dementia 25 years later? That was a really powerful driving question in my mind when we were using it to help us structure the conversations.
Yeah, I bet you discovered it evolved significantly, but the core of it still remained very much true, much like, you know, the root of this series being based in Kitwood's earlier work and how the community and the area has changed since then. So while we wait for Reinhard to come back, why don't we move on to another question? We have a great one that is in reference to something Nigel said earlier, and it goes, Nigel's description of a deficit agenda with the focus on what goes rather than what remains was a real eye-opener for me. Would you say that your perspective has changed in some positive ways since dementia crashed into your lives? And I suppose that's to anyone that would wish to take it from the panel.
Yeah. Anyone from the panel for that one?
Well,
Francis.
Should maybe Nigel go first?
no,
Yeah,
you
sure.
go ahead, Lady Francis. I'll Bethlehem Ceiniog.
Thank you, Sir Nigel. Life has changed dramatically, I think, for me and for my family, of course. You know, at the beginning, you wonder why anyone's telling you you've got dementia. You were you 1 second, and the next minute you've got this label on you saying you've got a brain disease. But you don't go to somewhere that treats brain diseases like neurology, you go to the psychobabblists. Sorry, I'm never very good at what their real name is. That's where you go. And for me, that was sort of seemed a bit weird. After all, you know, you're not, you might be going, you know, a bit different than you were, and then eventually very different than you were, but it's a disease and it has its progression, and what nobody tells you is that it's going to be, if you're lucky, really slow, and that you can have a worthwhile life. And I think that is of massive importance.
Yeah. Thank you, Francis.
I think that is sort of one of the key things about it.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Thank you. Nigel.
Well, I mean, we all know dementia is life-changing, but it's not life-ending. And a diagnosis doesn't change the person we were before we came to the attention of the mental health services. We're saying that we're still, when I was diagnosed, I got 2 days afterwards, I got a knock on the door from a community mental health nurse, bless him, and he said, "Oh, I'm from the mental health team." And I said, "Can you tell me what mental illness I'm suffering from?" He said, "Well, you're not." And I said, "Well, why are you going to visit me?" So it was that assumption that I could cope with things, and to a certain extent they were right. But when I got to know other people like yourselves, Chris Roberts, who were coping rather well with it, and it inspired me to do the same. And the way the medical model describes us, I mean, the word dementia means out of your mind. So, you know, it's that role playing, that labeling, which I think from the very, very beginning attacks our personhood, attacks our human rights, and all the other things that attach to citizens. We're still citizens, and we still have a role to play. You know, it might be a different type of role, but it is. And I don't like people saying, "Oh, well, is that too much for you?" Let me find out. I'll tell you if it's too much for me. You know, I don't like people saying, "Well, we're only safeguarding you." Safeguarding me from what? What are you safeguarding me from? And they say, "Oh, well, danger." I said, "Well, are you going to follow me around every day and every minute of my day?" "No, I'm not." "Well, stop using words that don't mean anything." That's what I meant by a deficit agenda.
Thank you, Nigel. And those words do mean something to everyone, I hope, that you've shared with us this afternoon. George.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that for me, my diagnosis was a bit of a revolution and revelation in my life, because when I became an activist, I was already doing a bit of patient participation activism, but I suddenly had a cause, and the more I got to know people like yourselves and the rest of the deep people, the more I realized that what I was thinking was thought by a lot of other people. And so for me, yeah, it's not a deficit. I've got a lot of new things in life, which really give me more pleasure than I've ever had before, like art. Thank you, Franny. And you know, and just going around doing research stuff now in dementia, and doing these talks and whatever else. It's wonderfully rewarding, and it fulfills a lot of Kit Wood's flowers, like identity and occupation and inclusion and love as well.
Yeah, very true. Thank you. Sam.
There are a couple more hands up if people want to continue on this question.
Tracy.
Sorry. I just want to say so quickly that when I first got diagnosed, I was only young. I was only like in my 40s, and I was still nursing, and it was it wasn't a shock. It was it was a relief when I got my diagnosis, because I thought I had something else, because like a bad nurse, I googled my symptoms. But throughout the 9 years of having it, like most of us, we just adapt to every time. Like, it has got worse in 9 years. I do have problems like most people with PCA. They have problems with their vision. But it's about adapting all the time to try and keep going, to try and keep independent as much as possible, to fight the good fight. And those sort of things are what keeps us going, is not giving up, just adapting to each curveball that's thrown at us each time it happens. And that's all I want to say, really.
Well, I think that's a fabulous way to conclude what we're talking about here, Tracy. So thank you. Sam.
I guess we have a few minutes left, so we can use that time to maybe answer one more question. I suppose going back to the core of the book, and it's, you know, how it reaches multiple members of society and has a large audience. What are the top tips in the book for carers of people with dementia?
Someone like to take that question? Top tips for carers? Any hands up? Julie.
I I would say that the top tip really is putting aside the dementia for a moment. Look at us. Look at Keith and what his needs are, and that is how you can apply what is best to support Keith, then would be to support me, or if you're looking at how best to support Jennifer or Tracy, then, you know, that is what that phrase, person-centered care. My God, they were talking about person-centered care when I started my nurse training over 40 years ago. But how many times do you, at the point of receiving care, actually get person-centered care? It tends to still be just a matter of words. And in order to put any kind of care support, health, social care, into action, you have to start with looking at that person and what their particular needs are, because everyone on this screen today has different types of dementia. They'll have different ways in which their dementia has affected them, and the way that they have found helps them best affects their lives. So let Tracy go now.
That's great. Thank you, Tracy.
Yeah, I just want to say that my big issue sometimes is that people always say, oh, for a quiet life or for easy life, we do it all for you, or we take over, or we'll tell you what to do. And I hate that. I hate somebody coming into my life and saying, oh, I'll do this because it's quicker, or no, you're too slow, or they don't do that right. And that's the worst thing. I honestly, it's the worst thing you can do. You're looking after somebody with dementia. Even if you have, like washing up, even if you have to wash up again after they're finished, when they go upstairs or they go for a break and rest or something, does it matter? As long as we're still useful in whatever stage of dementia we have. We're still useful. Just that we just need to be people, not to be taken over. My biggest fear is that happening to me. So that's what I would like to say to people: don't take over.
Thank you. And Frances, the last word goes to you.
Oh, my top tip for carers would be to talk to one of us with lived experience, so that we can tell you what it feels like from inside. And as I have been doing this lately locally, I do know that it does help carers to understand what it is that they're dealing with. They had no idea about some of the sensory things that their person was feeling, or some of the things that they couldn't do and what muddled them up. And it's only by talking to somebody with lived experience that you can do that. And I think there's sort of some real leeway in there to help carers cope and have more understanding.
Thank you, Francis, and thank you, everyone. If you'd just like to show your books now, those of you who are home at the moment, I know a number of you are away from home at the moment, so not with a book by the side. There it lies. Therein lies the story. So thank you. Sam, do you want to close the webinar now?
Absolutely. Thank you so much again for a wonderful question and answer session and for the webinar itself. Thank you for all of our attendees, and the recording of the meeting will be circulated to everyone that's registered, even those that haven't made it today, and of course available for wider circulation. I believe there will be a discount code shared in the chat, and also this will be circulated more widely to our wonderful panelists, registrants and attendees. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Wonderful to see you all.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.